All right.
Morning.
Yep. Good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday.
Already.
Isn't that book there? Today, Jesus teaches openly at the temple. John chapter 7, starting at verse 10. But after his brothers left for the festival, Jesus also went, though secretly, staying out of public view. The Jewish leaders tried to find him at the festival and kept asking if anyone had seen him. There was a lot of grumbling about him among the crowds. Some argued, "He's a good man," but others said, "He's nothing but a fraud who deceives the people." But no one had the courage to speak favorably about him in public, for they were afraid of getting in trouble with the Jewish leaders. Then, midway through the festival, Jesus went up to the temple and began to preach. The people were surprised when they heard him. "How does he know so much when he hasn't been trained?" they asked. So Jesus told them, "My message is not my own. It comes from God who sent me. Anyone who wants to do the will of God will know whether my teaching is from God or is merely my own. Those who speak for themselves want glory only for themselves, but a person who speaks to honor the one who sent him speaks truth, not lies. Moses gave you the law, but none of you obey it. In fact, you are trying to kill me." The crowds replied, You're demon-possessed. Who's trying to kill you?" Jesus replied, "I did one miracle on the Sabbath, and you are amazed. But you work on the Sabbath too. When you obey Moses' law of circumcision, actually, this tradition of circumcision began with the patriarchs long before the law of Moses. For if the correct time for circumcising your son falls on the Sabbath, you go ahead and do it so as not to break the law of Moses. So why should you be angry with me for healing a man on the Sabbath? Look beneath the surface so you can judge correctly." Some of the people who lived in Jerusalem started to ask each other, "Isn't this the man they are trying to kill? But here he is, speaking in public, and they say nothing to him. Could our leaders possibly believe that he is the Messiah? But how could he be? For we know where this man comes from. When the Messiah comes, he will simply appear. No one will know where he comes from." While Jesus was teaching in the temple, he called out, "Yes, you know me, and you know where I come from. But I'm not here on my own. The one who sent me is true, but you don't know him. But I know him because I come from him, and he sent me to you." Then the leaders tried to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him because his time had not yet come. Many among the crowds at the temple believed in him. After all, they said, "Would you expect the Messiah to do more miraculous signs than this man has done?" Now the commentary. Jesus came with the greatest gift ever offered, so why did he often act secretly? The religious leaders hated him, and many would refuse his gift of salvation no matter what he said or did. The more Jesus taught and worked publicly, the more these leaders would cause trouble for him and his followers. So it was necessary for Jesus to teach and work as quietly as possible. Many people today have the privilege of teaching, preaching, and worshiping publicly with little prosecution. These believers should be grateful and make the most of their opportunities to proclaim the good news. The Jewish religious leaders had a great deal of power over the common people. Apparently, these leaders couldn't do much to Jesus at this time, but they threatened anyone who might publicly support him. One of the reprisals for believing in Jesus was excommunication from the synagogue. John chapter 9, verse 22. To a Jew, this was a severe punishment. Everyone was talking about Jesus, but when it came time to speak up for him in public, no one said a word. All were afraid. Fear can stifle our witness. Although many people talk about Christ in church, when it comes to making a public statement about their faith, they are often embarrassed. Jesus says he will acknowledge us before God if we acknowledge him before others. Matthew 10, verse 32. Be courageous. Speak up for Christ. Those who attempt to know God's will and to do it will intuitively know. Those who attempt to know God's will and do it will know intuitively that Jesus was telling the truth about himself. Have you ever listened to religious speakers and wondered if they were telling the truth? Test them. Their words should agree with, not contradict, the Bible, and their words should point to God and His will, not to themselves. The Pharisees spent their days trying to achieve holiness by keeping the meticulous rules that they had added to God's law. Jesus' accusation that they didn't keep Moses' laws stung them deeply. In spite of their pompous pride in themselves and their rules, they did not even fulfill a legalistic religion, for they were living far below what the law of Moses required. Murder was certainly against the law. Jesus' followers should do more than the moral law requires, not by adding to its requirements, but by going beyond the mere do's and don'ts of the law to the spirit of the law. Most of the people were probably not aware of the plot to kill Jesus. John chapter 5 verse 18. There was a small group looking for the right opportunity to kill him, but most were still trying to decide what they believed about him. According to Moses' law, circumcision was to be performed 8 days after the baby's birth. Genesis 17 verses 9 through 14 and Leviticus 12 verse 3. This rite was carried out on all Jewish males to demonstrate their identity as part of God's covenant people. If the 8th day after birth was a Sabbath, the circumcision would still be performed, even though it was considered work. While the religious leaders allowed certain exemptions to Sabbath laws, they allowed none to Jesus, who was simply showing mercy to those who needed healing. This chapter shows the many reactions people had toward Jesus. They called him a good man, John 7 verse 12, a fraud, John 7 verse 12, demon-possessed, John 7 verse 20, the Messiah, John 7 verse 26, and the prophet whose coming had been predicted by Moses, John 7 verse 40. We must make up our own minds about who Jesus is, knowing that whatever we decide will have eternal consequences. There was a popular tradition that the Messiah would simply appear, but those who believed this tradition were ignoring the scriptures that clearly predicted the Messiah's birthplace, which is Micah chapter 5, verse 2. Okay, there's a lot to talk about there.
There's a lot to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we can't, I guess we can't fault the Jews back then, even though they had Jesus walking around with them then. You know, it's kind of the same for us. We have a lot of people that claim to be Christ,
Sure.
you know, and we dismiss them as crazy and whatnot. And even though they are, because we know we have the truth here in the Bible, you know, we can compare that. But I can understand their, you know, the common people's belief, because they were polluted by, you know, false teachers and.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so they didn't want to, all they cared about was they were under Roman law, and they thought that the Messiah was going to be this somebody like David, who was a great conqueror and saved them from their oppressors. But and Jesus did. He saved us from our oppressors, which is sin, death, and the devil.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what they wanted. They wanted physical rescue from their physical oppressors.
You know, we have to be careful in today's time too, because we also have been under the false teachings.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of things that are just considered normal the way it is, didn't actually or originate in the Bible. So we have to really, you know, we have to read it for yourself and decide for yourself and what you believe about Jesus, and realize that those decisions will have eternal consequences.
We have enough of our own history and leadership of the church to add on all these extra human rules. And I've always thought this, and it's been brought up again, that when we are new Christians, everybody wants to say, all you got to do is believe in Jesus and you're saved. And people do, and they accept Christ, and their eyes are open. Okay, Christ is my Savior. And then we come along and say, well, now wait a minute. If you do this, you know, you're going to hell. If you say that, you're going to hell. And now we got all this long laundry list of rules and things that you can and can't do. And you're like, well, you just said Jesus saves me. Well, he did, but, you know, we got to get away from that. Run out of time, Alec. We'll talk to you later.